I'm hearing a lot of people speculating, will Syria fall apart as a result of Assad's fall? But I think that misses the point, really, which is that Syria fell apart quite some time ago. So the question really is, will a new government in Damascus be able to put Syria back together? I think something that you don't hear very much about is what Syria has in common with Iraq, with Lebanon, with Jordan, and even with Israel. Spoiler alert, they're not cut from the same cloth, but they were actually cut by the same tailor, the colonial tailors in London and Paris. Syria didn't exist as a state a little over a century ago, nor did Jordan, nor did Lebanon, nor did Iraq, and nor did Israel. All of these states had been part of the Ottoman Empire, but there were no nation states that followed the boundaries that we know today. Those were created by the British and the French, who had beaten the Ottomans in World War I and were now dividing up the territory between them. When a colonial power draws boundaries, you're not designing a country to be ruled by its people. You're designing a country to be ruled in the interests of a colonial power. You're drawing them in a way that doesn't lend itself to national cohesion or national identity. So what's very common to all of those states is that they're actually ruled by minorities friendly to the colonial powers. In the case of Iraq, we see the British install a Sunni Arab monarchy that's friendly to the British, ruling over a country whose majority are Shia Muslim and a Kurdish minority. In the case of Jordan, you see the British import a royal family whose roots are in the Saudi city of Hejaz to rule over a population that's mostly Palestinian and Bedouin. In the case of Lebanon, the French carve off a mini-state in order to create an entity that's ruled by the region's Christian minority. In Palestine, the British put the European Jewish settlers in charge. They helped them create the infrastructure of settlement that later becomes the State of Israel at the expense of the Palestinian majority. In Syria, the Alawite sect, it's a minority religious sect, is brought into the army, and that sect becomes the spine and core of the army that basically rules for decades and decades. So the colonial powers created systems of minority rule that in many cases were actually quite vulnerable to outside powers. And what we've seen over the decades is the legacies of instability, violence, chaos in many of these countries actually dominate our headlines. So what we can say is that the fall of Assad is the latest and perhaps a massive acceleration of the 21st century collapse of what the British and French created, that the world that they made is steadily collapsing. The population of the region, as never before, are demanding their own right to actually set their own course, to decide how they're going to be ruled.